Links to my channel here over at SubStars or the various other links. What a challenging video this will be to do. After the ADL accuses Steam of being rife with a bunch of based chads with a sense of humor, some puppet senator who knows who's buttering his bread or who just wants to get reelected demands that Valve take action or get censored by the government. Don't we have a Bill of Rights to prevent that? So why do these special interest groups, these sinister NGOs with shadowy funding, have total control over the media and pop culture? These groups, with their anonymous donors, I mean, nothing's no funding. You can always trace money on the internet, and you trace the money to so many of these people who are pushing censorship, and it comes back to like the same four names. So the ADL and the media have the amazing ability to control the narrative simply by lying. It really is that easy. But what makes them dangerous is their ability to disseminate the message so widely because they have all the money they would need, which is a question in and of itself. So what they do is they lie, but at such a large scale that people accept it with less scrutiny than it deserves. The power of propaganda is at its core repetition of a message. And then there's the factor of social cohesion and degree of trust in a society. And the white pill, sort of, is that as America gets more diverse, the social cohesion has disappeared as well as trust, which basically indicates the collapse of a society as it finishes its transition from what was a nation, the Natal, to an economic zone controlled by the media and other NGOs. So the dark advantage there is that people are starting to understand that the media is essentially just a lying propaganda arm of some globalist NGO special interest group. The media's main point is to push a globalist anti-white narrative and secondary to make money from advertising. The normie would assume the media is to report the news, and the cynical normie would say the media is to sell advertising space. Let me open up this, and they are both mostly wrong. It's the same situation with Hollywood, or if you're familiar with the comic industry. It's to advance the interests of the rich, powerful, and extremely dangerous people who control. I'm scrolling slowly, watching this out of the corner of my eye because I know there's some hot images. Maybe I should just pause it and go, yeah, that's that one hot image. Anyway, the power of these parasitical groups is simply to label something you do. And honestly, I'm surprised Bounding even wrote this article. Kind of a bit odd because John Trent used to own it, and he's based, don't get me wrong, but he sold it to some company, and then he started That Park Place, and then That Park Place is amazing because it's run by him. But then Bounding to Comics started to become a little bit more milquetoast and mild. But then this article comes out, which I guess the thing is like you don't want to mess with gamers. They're not going to be politically correct when it's something they're concerned with. Anyway, the power of these parasitical groups is simply to label something you do with buzzwords like hate, extreme, alt, far, whatever word they program the sheep to be receptive of. The words don't really mean anything because the definition changes depending on what they want it to do. It's like, well, that means the word's like a circular definition. Yeah, and it's weird that how the mainstream has come to accept that, including some dictionaries where they define man as not woman and woman is not man, and everyone is so scared to just raise their hand and say, hey, the emperor has no clothes. You can't use a circular definition. It's nonsensical. But if you ask a Supreme Court justice and she doesn't know how to define woman, we're in for some very interesting days. So what they really mean is that someone's free speech is getting over target and it must be silenced. And no, none of our elected representatives are going to fight for free speech. We have like 500 people at the federal level, bicameral, 535 representatives. Yeah, that was like old America from 200 plus years ago. Those days are gone. They're not going to fight for free speech and protection from these NGOs that limit speech because unfortunately the politicians are also funded by these groups and their backers, carrot or stick, plateau e plio, silver or lead, play ball, or your wife might pass suddenly, sort of thing, or you simply don't win re-election. So these groups, ADL, SPLC, ACLU, and GPAF, and there's hundreds of others. It's a whole kind of second video in and of itself, but it's not one that's going to be on YouTube. There's hundreds of these websites that nobody visits. Anyway, others, they write these articles labeling your political ideas alt extremism, and they want to censor you immediately. Where most people would logically look at the person pushing the censorship, it's the Karl Popovic syndrome, where these useful idiots draw a cartoon, and you look at this Popovic's ideas of, oh, we need to censor people immediately. And you can simply look at it and go, oh, well, you're the problem. If you want to censor people because you think you get to determine what other people's ideas may entertain with all your bizarre straw man arguments, it's like, well, clearly you're the problem. And it's a shame that more left-wing people don't have a touch of tism to not understand political correctness and speak up about these things. If you're pushing censorship, you should look at that person and go, oh, you're the most dangerous person in the room. Because the censor here, the ADL chief, is saying that he's going to decide for the cattle what ideas they may entertain, and he and his well-funded friends write these articles with paid anonymous writers for websites that nobody reads, so they can refer the media to them as sources. This is their own tautology. How it works is the ADL will call some reporter, and to his credit, Tim Pool talks about this, or at least he used to years ago, and you should listen to him. We'll call some reporter, tell him what the narrative is and what they want to push, and the reporter will dutifully write the article and refer to the group as a group that the ADL has labeled far-right extremism, which on its own is meaningless, because a reporter should be asking questions. But the media is not the media. How is the ADL defining these words, and how does this group meet the elements, and why doesn't the ADL support free speech, and why don't the media support free speech? The media is able to do what they do because of that First Amendment, and the media doesn't do that because the reporter would be debanked, fired, and banned from social media. Saturday Night Live did some skit about people crying about being debanked, because Saturday Night Live didn't know that was actually happening in America, Europe, and Canada. That's how far out of touch the Hollywood liberal elite are. They have no idea what their globalist puppet masters are actually doing to regular people. But if they find out, they'll find a way to justify it and defending the trillion-dollar banking industry. Because that's how the modern left speaks truth to power and rages against the machine, by fighting for censorship, defending the financial industry and corporations, and working with the FBI to track down people who actually did speak truth to power by protesting a corrupt government. If you told some leftists what the modern left would have turned into, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it would be like they would think you're pulling their leg and you're doing some kind of Orwellian joke on them, and you fast forward to the future and go, oh no, they actually are doing this. They're working with the FBI. That's the modern left. They work with the federal government, the feds, the corrupt feds, a corrupt military industrial concept. That's the left wing, because the wrong people had a protest, and they work very hard to put protesters in prison for 20 years. And the leader of the we'll call him the Euro Nationalist Pizza Supreme group, Enrico Tarano, is a black Cuban guy. I mean, that's the best they can come up with. It's absolutely bizarre. 22 years in prison for a peaceful assembly to actually speak truth to power. And thank God the left wing diligently worked with the government to put protesters in prison. If you're on the left, if I know some of those people are going to have a come to Jesus moment. So it's weird that no big figure on the left had the balls to ask what the F the left turned into. So anyway, who elected these people to ADL, SPLC, ACLU to decide what's offensive in a video game? Why does he get to decide what is censored? The water salesman, the alleged con artist? How did we get to this place where we have groups like the ADL and these other groups working to censor free speech, or to the point where Nina Jankowicz almost got a ministry of truth under Biden and Kamala? Why does Greenblatt and his group get to decide for millions of video game players what ideas they're allowed to be introduced to and explore and discuss among themselves? It's bizarre that these groups have gotten so powerful, or they're even taken seriously, but it is that emperor is wearing no clothes situation. But if the company doesn't obey their ADL masters, the ADL will contact their advertisers and the banks and force the companies to censor and push the narrative that the ADL finds acceptable. There is no offensive speech. There's speech that these people find offensive. The left can't meme because they have bad ideas that can't be defended, but the left can try to censor our ideas because if we have free speech, we win. We need free speech more than we need entities like Greenblatt telling us that he is offended by a cartoon frog in a Hugo Boss costume. If you don't like a game, don't play it. If you're such a bleeding pussy that you find a frog with the OK symbol or the Roman salute offensive, a frog, then you shouldn't be playing games other than Candy Crush, which presumably doesn't have a Hugo Boss frog. Is there a level where you find the frog pops up? That would be amazing. Why exactly do millions of people have to change? Because Greenblatt doesn't want people exposed to different ideas, because that's what these frog icons are and all this other stuff. They're different concepts, or most of the time they're humor. Believe it or not, we don't find these things offensive. We like them, or we think they're funny. And it's even funnier that someone would find them offensive. The groups like these are such snowflakes that they have to start a hate campaign to shut down ideas and beliefs that they don't agree with, instead of just minding their own business and not playing these games, because the concept and voices the ADL is terrified of are right of center Christian European nationalist perspectives. Anything right-wing Greenblatt feels, he must censor it. But why aren't there pro-nationalist, pro-free speech groups that are as powerful or more powerful than the ADL? And no, it's not the ACLU if you're expecting them to save you. They've been completely subverted and corrupted for over 30 years. It's been a long time since, I forget that, their famous protest. I want to say, I don't remember where it was. Was it in Illinois or something? They wanted the Hugo Boss group, oddly enough, led by a Jewish guy who thought he was like spiritually a Hugo Boss. The whole story is bizarre. They wanted to march through a neighborhood in uniform, as is their First Amendment right to do. And this group wanted just to stop them. I remember reading that case a long time ago, and I was surprised that there'd be people who wanted to stop free speech, and that kind of started my journey on the red pill. I mean, the whole story is bizarre because the guy who, and they won the right to do it, but they didn't do it for whatever reason. I mean, because if you win the right to do it, it's like that the point is proved. You don't actually have to do it. But the guy who led them later came out to be, of Jewish himself, which is just bizarre. I assume he's mentally ill, because after that he went on to do like space alien, spiritual out of body kind of, that kind of, I don't know, cryptozoology kind of bizarro stuff. So I think he is probably a little bit nuts. The point is that case, this ACLU's famous case, and there's plenty of lawyers, free speech people who are very fond of free speech, and they write about the subversion and corruption of the ADL because it's not, the ACLU, because it's not the same group anymore. The group that, I want to say Sandusky, I don't remember. It's not the same group that would protect the right of free speech and peaceful assembly anymore. They're completely subverted and corrupted. And you can look at the ACLU, SPLC, and who runs them, who works them, who funds them, and they're far left terrorists. They're just open Bolsheviks. And they finally came out and released the paper that said, we're not going to protect Second Amendment civil liberties anymore, even though the group is called the ACLU, and we're not going to protect First and Second Amendment rights for right of center groups, because they just labeled them hate, extreme, alt, and they go, we're not going to protect those groups, and all those groups with that label that we just created for them are all on the right, so we'll protect left wing. And the funny thing is there are more, according to the FBI, and this bothered Cenk Uygur, it made him literally sputter on a stream. This was years ago when he was going through and reading this FBI report, because there are more black groups that are extreme groups of that ideology. tribal groups, so to speak, than there are European groups. And Senk read that, and he just lost his mind. He sputtered for a few seconds because he just couldn't accept that the FBI was presenting him with facts that went against his narrative. But no, the ADL does not care about civil liberties, or ACLU. They're an open globalist group pushing anti-white racism and hatred. And all three of these groups, and there's those are the ones you know of, and then there's GPAF, which the global extremism site, which is funded similar sources. And there's hundreds of others that run these websites that nobody goes to, but they're just created so they can be this bootstrap sourcing, this tautological sourcing, where they can refer to them as sources, but they're written by anonymous articles and nothing is verified, nothing is fact checked. But then the mainstream media will refer to these anonymous websites funded by someone who rhymes with anyway, and they'll refer to it as a source, like, oh, GPAF calls this a hate extremist group. And then you go, okay, well, a reporter is supposed to go to this site and ask them, well, where are your facts on this? Who, what, why, where, when, and how? And that doesn't happen anymore, because you'd get a phone call probably from your boss who goes, do you want to continue working for Washington Post or New York Times? Though credit to, I think, LA Times, the owner fired their entire editorial board because he realized they were so far left that in this new era, the next 4 years, the magazine was just going to go out of business if they continued to have such a far left-wing bias. Anyway, it's the real thing is, I'd like to put a pin on a timeline of when the left wing openly turned against free speech, because I think it was somewhere 80s and 90s, somewhere around that time. They decided they couldn't have free speech. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks to everyone over on SubScribeStar, Throne, Buy Me a Coffee, and the Odyssey member section. Believe it or not, this is actually not the first version of this video, and the other more honest version is in the member section at SubScribeStar and Odyssey, because YouTube is asshole. Anyway, I'll see you guys all next episode.